Dear Scare Mail, have you ever read the book The War of the Worlds? It was a novel written by H.G. Wells all the way back in the 1890s. Can you believe it? Humanity has been obsessed with the idea of warring with an alien race before we even knew they existed. But little do you know that we have been at war with an alien species since the late 1970s, sparking with an encounter so cataclysmic it would end up shaping the shadow government that would come to control this country until this very day. My father was on the front lines of this now infamous battle, which I am going to tell you just as he told me all those years ago. I woke up at 0500, same as every day, brushed my teeth and had myself a light workout of 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups. Normally, I would go for a 5-mile run, but today was different. Something about that day had me feeling I was going to need my energy, and boy, I was right. After getting dressed at 0530, I inspected my M16 and Colt M19 to make sure everything was in working order. I hadn't had to use them at all recently, so the upkeep was minimal. I tested my radio for functionality, and upon confirmation that it worked, made my way to my team's briefing, which, at the time, was considered highly classified. The mission we were given didn't seem like a difficult one. We were to fly out to a geology camp and assist in escorting some engineers underground to repair some drilling equipment. Why they needed a task force of seasoned Green Berets was not disclosed, just that we provide support in case things went south. My buddies and I sat down for breakfast and immediately knew something was up. They had given us steak and eggs for breakfast, which we all knew was a very bad sign. They call it the Last Supper, and most bases will serve it before a mission that could endure many casualties. However, this didn't shake us as much as it should have. We were Green Berets, the apex predators of the United States military. Most of us had fought in Vietnam, so an elementary escort mission at a geology site seemed like a walk in the park, despite what the steak and eggs told us. At 0630, we boarded Apaches with our equipment and flew out to the geology site. We were surprised at how short the trip was, arriving at our destination in just over 15 minutes. Once there, we realized right away that this was no ordinary escort mission. In addition to the 3 SFGs we provided, or Special Forces groups, there were 3 more Beret SFGs that I didn't recognize, totaling near 60 soldiers. At this point, I was overly curious of what we had gotten ourselves into. What could they need all these men for? Still, that didn't matter at the time. What mattered was the mission being a success. That's it. A master sergeant from one of the other companies gave us a mission briefing, along with one of the engineers. Me, being one of 6 engineering sergeants, would descend down the shaft to troubleshoot the drill that had been malfunctioning, along with an engineer that worked at the site. The shaft was very narrow, so we'd only be able to descend 2 at a time. The engineer and myself would be the first to make the descent. We'd send the shaft back up, and the other engineering sergeants would make the trip in pairs of 2, and so on. Understanding our mission, we then gathered the equipment we'd need to successfully make the trip underground. I found myself at an impasse when we realized that the shaft had a surprisingly low weight limit, and with 2 grown men equipped with heavy tools and other equipment, we found ourselves having to leave certain things behind to make weight. Regrettably, I decided to leave my M16 on the surface, figuring that the underground tunnels would be too cramped to use it anyway. Besides, what could possibly be down there that my cult couldn't take care of? In addition to my rifle, I opted to leave behind my radio, considering it'd be worthless to use so deep underground. The engineer and I finally descended down the shaft. It moved slowly and wobbled as it did so. I decided to make small talk to distract both of us from the unpleasant ride we were taking underground. I asked how a drill so big couldn't penetrate standard bedrock, considering this drill was considered state-of-the-art in excavation at the time. The engineer mentioned that they never really knew. At a certain point in the drill's journey underground, a technical failure would occur and cause the drill to malfunction. I then asked why all these soldiers were needed for a standard equipment repair mission. He told me that the military is the one contracting their work, so he didn't find it out of the ordinary to see military personnel overly involved. However, so many of them at once could certainly be a cause for concern. As the shaft finally settled on the ground beneath us, we were immediately met by an incredibly foul smell. A smell so awful that I considered returning to the surface to retrieve a gas mask. And yet, there was no time for such pleasantries. If all went well, we would be back on the surface before we knew it. I clicked the button and sent the shaft back to the surface, while the engineer started investigating the drill. Once the shaft cleared the breach, I set up the work lights and joined the engineer in his investigation. We were shocked to see that the drill was undamaged, leading us to believe that it was an electrical failure that had been causing all the problems. We continued to survey the drill when, suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Out of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned away from the drill and gazed down the deep, dark tunnel before us. Out of the shadows, I could see something moving beyond the light's reach. I drew my sidearm and pointed it ahead. The engineer at this point also drew his weapon. I called out to whoever it was to show themselves, but what we would end up seeing would infect my dreams for the rest of my life. A tall, gray alien with big, black eyes emerged from the shadows. It tilted its head, curious as it examined us. We both froze. I had never seen something so terrifying in my life. It was much taller than us, around 7 feet or so, and stretched its long legs towards us. The sound of the shaft activating snapped us out of our shocked state, and before I could assess the threat levels of the situation, the engineer opened fire on the being before me. The being stumbled backwards and collapsed, and at that moment, 2 more creatures emerged from the shadows. Their temperament appeared to shift from curiosity to aggression. The other beings began lunging forward at us, faster now than the one before. I opened fire, felling the nearest creature as it sprang forward. The one behind him continued onward, shooting out a bright beam of light from some sort of weapon as he did so. I took cover behind the drill, watching as the engineer's hand was split in half, causing him to drop his weapon. He fell to the ground, tossing and turning as he reeled in pain. Luckily, the shaft arrived with 2 more berets on board, and they had their rifles with them. They hopped off the lift, providing immediate cover fire as I dragged the engineer to the shaft. I tossed him on and told him to send reinforcements as I smacked the button, sending him back above ground. I swung back around and immediately began firing my pistol at the enemies. More were appearing from the shadows, and my 2 comrades were stuck behind the drill for cover, hiding from the errant beams of light flying all around us. I continued firing until my clip ran empty, trying to provide as much support for the other berets as much as I could. I took down 2 more and took cover behind a small rock as I reloaded. We were now on the advance as I moved out from behind the rock, slowly moving forward as we took down creature after creature. But there was now a problem. We were moving deeper into the tunnel, deep enough to where the work lights could no longer provide us visibility. We could no longer see the beings before us, or how many of them there were. More beams of light flooded the tunnel. I dove to the ground for cover and tried to fire, but there was another problem. I could no longer grip my weapon and found myself struggling to pull the trigger. I tried to stand up, but as I did, my entire right arm fell from my body, dropping to the ground. Now in shock, my vision became blurry and my hearing was overrun with a loud ringing. I collapsed to the ground, seeing nothing but a parade of bright lights around me. I could feel myself growing cold, and for a moment, I felt nothing but peace. Someone was dragging me on my back, another soldier I didn't recognize. He threw me on the lift and pressed the button as he turned around to re-engage with the enemy. And that was the last thing I remember. I woke back up at our compound, stuck in a hospital bed with a plethora of wires and tubes connected to my body. I tried to move my right arm, only to realize it wasn't there. I panicked and let out a long yelp before being bombarded by nurses and doctors. They injected me with something, and then I blacked out once again. I woke up several days later, surrounded by generals I did not recognize, along with a couple men in black suits. They skipped all pleasantries and asked me what I remembered. It was still all a blur to me, but I remembered, clear as day, what had taken place. Still, I feared for my life at this moment, so I played dumb. I told them that I didn't remember anything. I asked them what had happened and how I lost my arm. They told me that the tunnel collapsed on us as we were fixing the drill, stating that I had acted heroically while rescuing the engineer. In trying to save the others, a boulder landed on my arm. They were able to retrieve me, but failed to retrieve anyone else. They solemnly told me that I was the only survivor of my group. I wept, knowing fully well that all of my friends were now dead, and, even worse, no one would know of their heroic sacrifice against an enemy we had no business fighting. After nearly a year of rehabilitation, I was debriefed and sent home with honors. My father didn't tell us this story until he was laying on his deathbed. We had never really known how he lost his arm up to this point, but upon learning this information, we wish he would have kept it to himself. The thought of a battle taking place underground between humans and aliens was too much of a burden for us to bear, and yet our father lived with an even greater burden. The thought of his friends being sent down into a tunnel in pairs just to be slaughtered in a fight they could not win. Now, I'm sure you noticed that the writer of this email never revealed the name of the base this took place at. But I'm not stupid, and neither are you. This was the infamous Battle of Dulce at the Dulce Base on the Colorado-New Mexico border. The idea of a war taking place right underneath our feet is an interesting one, or rather, a terrifying one. I had to do my homework on this story, big time, and not everything I came across gave me much comfort on this topic. There's a lot of theories and conspiracies that involve aliens living among us on our very own planet, if we can even call it our very own planet anymore, because it's starting to sound like we share it. Maybe we always have. And I plan on doing a much more in-depth video on that, so stay tuned for it. And let me know in the comments of what you'd like to see from that or other events that could be useful in that kind of video. In conclusion, rumor has it that the Battle of Dulce continued for another several years before ending in peace. A mysterious truce was made between the aliens and the United States military, the contents of which we aren't really sure of. But something tells me it's not entirely in the best interest of the human race. Everyone keeps saying the world is ready for disclosure. You can see it everywhere. Online, in the newspapers, even in Congress now. But honestly, I don't think humans are ready for it. That's why the government fights so hard to keep it a secret. And can you blame them? Think about it. We can't even tolerate our own fellow man. We hate humans crossing our border. We hate humans that need our aid in wars taking place across the world, both in Ukraine and Gaza. Regardless of how you feel towards these topics, there's no denying that there's a great lack of tolerance and empathy towards our fellow man. So I can't help but pause when hearing that humanity is ready for disclosure, because we are definitely not. Humans are tribal creatures, after all. War is in our DNA. And if another race of aliens descended from the heavens and introduced itself to humanity, that doesn't mean we're all of a sudden on the path to enlightenment. It would mean we're on another path to war. Thanks for watching, and good night.